Welcome everyone to NGW's In a Nutshell podcast, which takes stock of the most important developments shaping the global natural gas industry. It is great to be joined once more by Anne-Sophie Corbeau, a global research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, and Thierry Bros, energy expert and professor at Sciences Po Paris. So, this is the first time we've come together since COP28. So, I think a good place to start would be asking your reflections on this summit. Let me start with you, Thierry.
Yes, thank you. I think last time we had this podcast, we call it Much Ado About Nothing. And I think we were right on more than one level. First of all, I don't think nothing much happened. But I really think this is also a theater play. I mean, we seem to have people. I'm talking about theater, not to be rude and talking about the circus, but we have people going from COP to COP, trying to put some languages, and the language doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to give you one example that I think is really strange here. The COP pledge, and I read them, says we want to limit warming to 1.5%. The world requires 3 times more renewable energy capacity by 2030 and must double the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvement from 2 to 4% every year until 2030, which means that for some kind of strange thing happening, on the 1st of January 2024, we had some new technology that's able to provide more energy efficiency. First of all, let us remind us that energy efficiency hasn't been 2% per annum in the last 10 years. It's been more than 1.5% per annum. And so it is very unlikely we are going to do this. And all the scenario of the COP28 and the IEA net zero scenario is based on this, the fact that if you manage to massively increase energy efficiency, primary energy consumption doesn't need to grow, and so you solve the problem when just having more renewable. Unfortunately, I think what we are facing is more and more oil, more and more gas, and more coal demand and production going forward. So really, I think we were right in stating that this was not going to be a big element, but perhaps another point here would be it's a circus, and unfortunately, it should continue.
Anne-Sophie?
Yeah, I am probably going to be for once a little bit less blunt than Thierry. I think there were a couple of messages which were slightly different from the previous ones and also from what was expected, given who, the president of the COP was. I mean, we had, the world transitioning away from fossil fuels. Okay, in absolute terms, it doesn't mean that much, but it's still some sort of a signal which, was particularly complicated to agree upon between the different participants. There is something that we have already underlined, which is really the fact that, there are two worlds which are meeting at COP. There is a developed world and, countries which have a particularly high energy demand per capita, as Thierry, was mentioning. Demand is very important and energy efficiency is very important. And those who have, very low energy demand per capita, and in the name of a just transition, well, they want to be able to continue to grow. And when these two worlds basically meet, you need to be able to make compromises. So I think this statement was very much an affair of compromising. There were maybe not really at COP, but around COP, some announcement on methane emissions, which are particularly important. Just before COP started, we had, the announcement, of course, well-expected announcement on the EU side. There were also some announcements on the US side. So I think, given the importance of methane emission, not only for this industry, but in general, because of their impact on climate change, this is particularly important that we are seeing making progress in that direction, even if these are baby steps. But I do hope that, it's really clear for everybody that this is an absolutely a critical issue. On tripling renewable energy, I think it's a no-brainer. There is also, nuclear coming back. I think that's also important to highlight, even if when you are looking at the big announcement, you are seeing Mr. Macron, for example. I saw some announcements that were, in the news with the Belgian minister. So basically, we are showing two policymakers, two politicians who have actually managed during their mandates to decommission a couple of nuclear power plants. But this is not the important part of the story. The important part of the story is that a certain number of countries are looking at nuclear, and that I have to say, thanks to Mrs. Agnès Pannier-Runacher, who unfortunately is no longer a minister in France, we have managed to build in Europe an alliance on nuclear, which I hope is going to be fruitful, because I think, well, and I am being French here, nuclear is part of the solution. Sorry.
Perhaps I can add one element here. I fully agree with Anso analysis. What I was questioning more is the wording versus how things are going. Yes, on methane emission, you're absolutely right, and it should be a no-brainer. I mean, it should have been done many years ago, and the industry is a bit liable here. Let's also use the right words. The industry should operate with virtually no methane emission and virtually no flaring, and that's not what we have in the data. On the nuclear, yes, I mean, they were talking about this multiplying by 3 by whatever date is, but again, France did sign this, but doesn't want to multiply itself by 3, its nuclear capacity, first of all. And secondly, news flow this week again shows that nuclear is going to be late, delayed, more costly, as we've seen in the UK example. And so I think we've wasted time in building stuff, whatever it is, be it renewable, be it nuclear, be it gas. And now we are entering a world where interest rates are higher, where the price of everything has gone up. And so it's going to be more difficult. And unfortunately, as I was alluding, remember that prior to the COP, just a few days before the COP, the Indian coal minister increase the target for producing coal in his own country, increase it to 60% from now to 2030. And India is the number 2 coal producer. So I think that if you're in a world where you have a constraint, where the magic model, the magic math doesn't provide the outcome, the least costly option and the least delayed option is going to unfortunately be in coal. And I still have a dystopian scenario where we see a coal rebound. We shall see what the 2023 data are in coal consumption, but I'm worried it's going to go up in a big way, and I'm worried it's going to continue to go up.
Okay. When you were looking forward, both of you, when you were looking forward to COP28, what were the key announcements or agreements you were hoping for which did not materialize? Anne-Sophie?
I was hoping for maybe clearer commitments on coal, just to say something, a little bit different compared to Thierry. But, we recognize that in terms of, pure CO2 emissions, coal is a fuel which is emitting the most. Then if you are comparing with natural gas, it really depends on where methane emission is. And that's particularly the case when you're looking at countries like China, which, the coal market, half of the coal market is China, so particularly important. I think methane emissions may be something a little bit more firm, because I fully agree with Thierry. This is something that we have been talking about for at least 8 years, if my memory is correct. Really, it has been front and center for quite a few years. And we should be at very, very, very low emissions, and we should have, now there is no way to hide because of the satellites and all the ways to measure accurately methane emissions, but we should have done much better already. Um, Something else which is particularly important and was definitely discussed, but I don't think we have really managed to find a solution. I mean, this is a whole part about financing the energy transition in developing countries, because indeed we are in a world with higher interest rates, and this is in particular penalizing developing countries because this is making their projects much more expensive. And if you are talking with African stakeholders, they are going to tell you, I mean, my project is pretty good, but I have all these people, the financiers, etc., who are telling me, I mean, your project is not financeable, and they do not understand. Yes, Africa is a little bit different, but however, you should have people who are willing to take risks there, and that's absolutely crucial. And by the way, Africa is more, I mean, it's very diverse. We say Africa, and in fact, it's more than 50 countries, and every single country is unique and has its own challenges and its own resources, very different. I mean, you cannot, compare, even though they are not that far away from each other, Congo and Nigeria, for example, totally different countries in terms of resources. But I think, the financial issue is absolutely crucial to make sure that part of the world is actually able to improve its energy situation in terms of energy access, in terms of the quality of energy, like access to clean cooking and other things, and also doesn't have the impression that it's really trailing behind.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, for me, I wasn't expecting much, so it turns out to be what I was expecting. No, I agree with what Anso stated. I think for me, if we were really serious about it, I mean, Germany should have come and said, "I'm closing down my coal-fired power plant." Until we haven't seen this, I don't believe it. I mean, the people that have given us a lecture on green, which are the Germans for the last 20 years, are still operating extremely dirty coal firepower generation. I mean, the electricity generation in Germany is sometimes worse than in other third world or global south countries. So, I mean, for me, the system is Germany, and I think Germany is a very interesting element because can Germany do this? We will address also the social unrest in Germany, etc. At the end of the day, either you say what you do or you just continue the circus.
Well, it seems
Okay,
that
so
in Germany, gas fire plants are coming back, and so I mean, I was discussing that with my colleagues. So first of all, I mean, I think Germany eventually will close down its coal fire plants. The key question is, of course, by when, and are you going to stick to that commitment? Germany is still, the largest coal fire generators in Europe. But the good news is that, I mean, we have observed, including, in Germany, a pretty massive decline of coal-fired generation in 2023. So when you are looking, and we just published something on that, when you are looking at the EU power generation data at transmission level, I mean, we have seen an increase in pretty much everything which is clean, which is totally different from what happened in 2022. So hydro and nuclear recovered. Nuclear a little bit because, of course, the Germans closed their nuclear power plants, and you had also some decommission in Belgium. But, French nuclear recovered. Hydro, and we are all happy about it, recovered. That's really good. And then you had a further increase of solar and also of wind. So this was able to drive a decline in gas and coal-fired generation, coal much more than gas, actually. But there was also something particularly interesting, which is that total generation actually dropped at an EU level by about 2.3%, which in my opinion is coming from two things. The first one is that, I mean, people or industries are consuming less. And the second thing
mhm,
is that I think there is also something which is happening behind the meter, because the data that we are collecting are ENSOE data. So they are not collecting, solar panels, everything, which is not automatically attached to the grid, or they do not really see what is happening, behind the consumer at their home. So there are some interesting trends happening there. But yeah, to go back to the question, I mean, Germany, well, I still do not understand why they closed the nuclear power plant, except that this is in the DNA of the Greens. But now they are looking at installing new gas power plants. And this is exactly what Mr. Scholz, I still have, the picture and the quote, was saying in 2021, in October 2021, when you are exiting from somewhere, so coal and nuclear, you need to enter somewhere else, gas. Well, 2 years and a half after that, we are back to gas. Great. Oh, yeah, because they figured out that hydrogen was probably a little bit too optimistic.
As we're on the subject of Germany, so December, long-term gas deal signed by Germany and Norway, signed between Equinor, the Norwegian state's gas producer, and SEFE, which essentially amounts to the former German assets of Gazprom. Do you feel that that was a positive move by Germany to lock in a long-term gas deal? I believe it's 10 BCM per year over 10 years. I might be wrong. It feels like Germany has, after some time, just committed to a long-term gas deal, and obviously they're expanding their LNG capacity, but it feels like this is kind of a recognition that they really need a lot of gas for quite a long time at affordable prices with stable supply. That's my kind of view. Thierry, what do you think?
Well, I mean, when you're hit by reality, you have to take reality into the spreadsheet unless you want to continue your degrowth and deindustrialization and make more and more people redundant in your country. That's, I think, is basically what's happening. It's happening not only there; it's also happening with some industries contracting directly for LNG because they understand that. The utilities haven't done this. I mean, the utilities, because the utilities in Germany, but in the other places, are still or willing to please the kings, the presidents or the commissioners, whatever you call them, they don't want to contract. And at the end of the day, we've seen this in 2022 and in 2023. Europe is becoming a premium LNG market. So the question is, do we want to continue to pay LNG at an extreme premium level, or are we going to understand what we want as an energy mix? And again, it can be coal, and maybe it's going to be coal for a few more years in Germany. I agree with what Anne-Sophie stated about 2023 power generation, but I think it's more market mechanism than anything else. And so the question is, how much energy do you need? How do you want to get this? And if you believe, like it's the Commission in Brussels believe that energy, electricity are luxury good, at the end of the day, you're going to completely deindustrialize your thing, and you may not need those contracts any longer. But if you believe that people needs to be heated, farmers needs to have petrol in their tanks, etc., then reality comes back in, and reality is making a comeback in Europe a few months before some elections that are going to be very stressed, I would say, for the European institutions.
Well, we'll come back to the elections soon. Anne-Sophie, anything to add on that point?
I mean, Germany was importing 50 BCM roughly of Russian gas by pipeline just 2 years and a half ago. So, you need to replace that. Now you have, several options. Either you are counting on the spot market or you want to have some deals. And I think the deal with Equinor was still kind of in line with the net zero commitment. So it's a short-term deal. It's not a 20-year deal, which have been signed by other companies. And of course, it's important because when you are signing a pipeline deal, you are stuck with it. It's not like you are going to be able to redirect the LNG somewhere else, which would be possible with the LNG contracts that Thierry has mentioned. So they are looking for alternatives, and guess what? I mean, Norway has been a very reliable supplier to Europe. So, Norwegians are quite also keen to see that there is some commitment coming from their big market, because we are their big market. So I think, this kind of relationship is going in the right direction. And if anything, Equinor is one of the leaders in terms of having very low methane emissions. So, that should at least please the grid. This is relatively clean gas, which is coming to the market. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to feed your consumers. And even if German's gas demand has been declining, it was the largest gas market in Europe. So you need to take that into account.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are in a year of elections. There's potentially going to be a UK election, US election, and European elections. There's also going to be an presidential election in Russia, but I'm not sure that is going to move the dial much. Let's start with Europe first. What's at stake in the elections in Europe this year?
Many things. A lot of uncertainty, I will start with. So the last elections were in 2019. Since then, we went through 2 years of COVID and 2 years of war. People have been experiencing all the uncertainties with the COVID, etc. The fact that at our borders, there is a war happening, which has a direct impact, because we are helping Ukraine now. We are engaged in accession of Ukraine into the EU. People have been fleeing Ukraine and have arrived to Europe, etc., etc. But there is a war, which is not something that we have seen in decades. So that's something to take into account. And inflation has been particularly acute in every single country, whether you're looking at food or whether you are looking at energy. Well, of course, not every single country is having the same kind of patterns in terms of energy prices, but it has been a shock for many people. And now we are going to vote for people who are kind of remote, because I don't know, well, when you were still, part of the EU, how often you were seeing MEPs. I mean, our representatives, you can see them. The MEPs, they are a bit invisible in Brussels or in Strasbourg, and you don't actually know who they are and what the hell they are doing. And Brussels, at least in France, is always a kind of word that you are using to describe some sort of policies and technocratic decision, which is coming from nowhere and you do not really understand. And at least I am talking here on behalf of, the kind of average population who is not following what is happening. So, for example, my parents, my in-laws, my sister-in-law, these people who are not following that. And frankly, I have no idea what is going to happen, but I can see a lot of discontent. And maybe this afternoon in Paris, we are going to be surrounded by unhappy farmers, because it was announced that they will be blocking all the highways. And we are seeing the farmers, that's the first thing in the elections. We're seeing the farmers unhappy in Romania. They have been unhappy also for quite a long time in the Netherlands. They are unhappy in Germany, and they are striking and they are blocking roads. And that's an interesting move. So I don't know exactly how this is going to end up. But what I know for sure is that all our politicians and our polling institutions are pretty badly equipped to actually foresee how the European Parliament is going to end up. So we might have surprises. And I hope this is not going to be the surprise that we saw in the French parliamentary elections a year and a half ago, because we had a big surprise that nobody had anticipated.
What was that surprise? Just for those
90 representatives of the Rassemblement National, that a week before, so a few weeks, our elections are in 2 rounds for the representatives. So at the beginning of the first round, people were saying, oh, maybe 20 maximum. And at just a week before the second round, the estimates were 20 to 50 representatives. And we ended up with 90, which is a big change or a big gap between the forecasts and the reality.
Okay, Thierry.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah. Your thoughts, please. Are we going to see a wave of politicians that are more pragmatic be elected, or is that just wishful thinking?
Well, perhaps let me comment on first the Anne-Sophie element. I mean,
Good.
on the inflation, I fully agree, but I think we were also misled by our own politicians, be there in Brussels or in our own countries. I mean, remember when we started going from the Green Deal, everybody was telling us it was going to be something that's not only needed, which I would fully agree with, but it's something that was going to create growth, economical growth, and something that was going to be virtually cheap. I mean, we were going to have wind and solar forever at zero cost. We were going to have all those elements. No, it's wrong. And nowadays people are discovering this. And perhaps I'd like to link what Anne-Sophie stated with the farmer. I believe that this commission came with two dogmatic papers. One was the Green Deal, and we've discussed this at length in those podcasts. But the other one was the Farm to Fork. And I believe those two are directive are the same coin. They are the two faces of the same coin. They were drafted by people that have basically a hidden degrowth agenda. And so the idea was we are not going to say to the people it's going to cost them more. We are not going to say to the people you can't eat cows. We are not going to say to people you can't have coal-fired power plant, but we will make sure that on the supply side, we will constrain the supply one way or another. At the end of the day, if you constrain the supply, price goes up, you create inflation, and you create unhappy people at the end of the day. I also have to stress, Anne-Sophie is right. I mean, people don't really understand how Brussels works, but at the end of the day, directives are pre-approved by council, by member states. So at the end of the day, we're always hearing on our TV, wherever we are in the 27 member states, it's Brussels fault, but it's not Brussels fault. I mean, it's Brussels fault with the approval of the member states, and member states have a veto. Just ask Orban; he knows how to use it. So, I mean, member states can say no to any kind of directive if they think it's against their sovereignty. And so what happened under Ursula von der Leyen was we had a dogmatic commissioner, in particular Timmermans, that came out with all those ideas that were not scientifically related, one of them being the hydrogen strategies that was completely fake, let's put it this way. And now people are understanding that not only have we missed 3 years, but we've lost a few billions of euros in budget, in subsidies, and in all those elements. And so the debt has increased, and we know this in France also, by the way, and the problem is still there. So what we are facing is a much tougher problem, much more urgent, with much less money to solve it. And this is going to make people unhappy. I think Brussels should be very worried that what if the farmers were going towards Brussels, not towards Paris? But I think that could be a real risk for the institution. How is this going to be solved? I mean, again, for an average voter, Brussels is far away, so I can carry my discontent. I can vote in stating that I'm discontent. Unfortunately, this operates both ways. If we go back to the old parliament of the one in right now in Brussels, it has been very green, and this is the green that are making the majority, and they've tried to push way far too much, I believe, the green agenda again on the Green Deal and on the Farm to Fork. They are going to be completely erased from the parliament. That's mostly for sure. Then the question, which Anne-Sophie was alluding, is what are they going to be replaced with? Are we going to replace it with the usual candidates that we have at the European level, a bit of a left, a bit of a right, or are they going to be replaced by deep dark blue? And I believe that at the end of the day, what could happen in a parliament where you remove the green and you replace it with deep dark blue is that at the end of the day, the parliament is unable to achieve any kind of new regulation, except perhaps on migration, but except this, i.e., all the usual Brussels topics that you see are going to be put on the back burner. So I really see that we've ended a cycle. The cycle is ending now in those few weeks. Um, we shall see how this is going to be reversed or stopped. But I don't see this being further engaged at the EU and Commission level, because voters don't want this any longer. I mean, voters have realized that the energy transition is every day we are hearing how much it's going to cost. I think last time it was 500 billion euros for transiting for electric lines. It's your gas-fired power plant. It's your nuclear plants, which are costing a fortune, etc., etc., etc. At a time where, as I'm saying, money is short and time is short.
Okay. Anne-Sophie, anything to add?
No, I kind of agree, especially on the money, because I mean, I think many countries have a budget issue. I mean, we just discovered in France that apparently there is about 8 billion missing from 2023. And, the question related to the answer to the farmers, worries, because I mean, problem number one for most farmers in Europe, besides, their struggle with process, is are not making enough money. And I am wondering how how the government can answer that kind of questions, and basically how the government can answer any kind of, okay, we need to invest more in energy transition, etc., but also people well-being with even less money, because we have been spending a hell lot of money over the past 2 years in order to help consumers of any kind, but now the deficits have increased quite substantially. So how are we going to do that? And also, I am just wondering, because the elections being in June, we should have started to see some candidates, talking to people. Who is going to have the courage, besides our prime minister and a few other people, to go down the road and actually talk to the discontent people and try to understand, really what the problem is, and try to convince them about the policies that they want to pursue. But I'm not sure that this is going to happen, because, hey, they probably will never see these people again.
I want to run this past both of you. Because there's a bigger distance between the voter and European elections versus the voter and national elections. Do you think voters tend to vote more idealistically when it comes to European elections versus national elections? Is that why we've we've ended up with a more kind of, well, as Thierry said, a more dogmatic energy policy? Maybe you, Anne-Sophie, maybe you agree or disagree with that, but what do you
Tell you
think?
what a lot of friends in France and in the UK have told me. They are disappointed in their politicians. They find that there is, in general, very low quality, and therefore they tend either not to vote or to vote for other people, because they are fed up with what has been proposed for the past few years, which is decreasing and decreasing quality.
Mhm.
And that's, just people around me I have known for many years telling me that. I cannot, just take myself as an example for the whole French and British population, obviously.
No,
Yes.
I think I agree again with Anne-Sophie, but I think if this is the mood, and I agree is the mood, then people will tend to find governments that are powerless. So what you want is people with no power, because when they use the power, they misuse it. So this is what we have in France with the split parliament, and I fear this is going to what's happening in Europe, where again, if you remove the green and you put more dark blue, you have something that is never going to find any consensus. And people at the end of the day may find themselves better off, because at the end of the day, you don't have new rules, new regulation that sometimes are completely incoherent. Again, go back to the Green Deal. And I think it's also time for the press and the politician to call on the ones that have made the wrong call. I mean, it's always strikes me they're always telling me, "Oh, we've done this properly." No, I mean, if you have the farmer on the street, it means that either you have the consumers very happy, and the consumers will say, "Fine, I have loads of very good food, very cheap. I'm very happy. We vote for those people, and let's forget the farmer," or because you have the farmer problem, but you also have the food problem, which is the inflation, etc., that Anne-Sophie was alluding, then you've alienated all your society. And so as a voter, you may say, well, I'm going to vote in a very in a very specific way, which will not allow any kind of majority. And we've seen this in France, but we've seen this in Belgium. We've seen this right now in the Netherlands, because at the end of the day, if they can't use the power, they can't misuse it.
Okay.
And I think that this is a little bit what's
Go ahead.
happening in Germany right now with that, traffic light government, which, I mean, you have three parties which don't really seem to agree on
Yes.
anything, and on the major themes like transport, for example, they are in total disagreement with one minister saying something and the other one saying something totally different. So, yeah, best example of nothing is moving forward.
Okay, I'd like to. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but best. The question is, if nothing moves ahead, are people better off or worse off than if things are moving in the wrong direction?
Well, I think I remember the Belgian government, for example, or having no Belgian government for, I can't remember how many days, but I remember it was a particularly long period. Hey, the
It's a long
country didn't
time.
collapse.
No.
And I think people were probably relieved to be off, no politician. I mean, can you imagine, Joe, no politician at all during 1 year? Oh, great. Fantastic vacation.
And if you have a debt problem, if you have no politician able to sign checks, your debt isn't going to increase. Very simple.
Yeah, they won't make any commitments and spending more.
Exactly. So and I really think that's what the voters will strategically do. As we are saying, they've done it in most countries. I mean, if I look at Europe, the only government that has been re-elected with majority is, I think, the Greek government. But all the rest, I mean, it's going to be more and more difficult because, as Anne-Sophie stated, the politicians' knowledge and ability to govern is questioned more and more by the people.
So fewer political decisions are needed. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's finish by zooming out a bit. US elections, UK elections. UK elections. So the opposition Labour Party want to, at least right now, they are saying that they want to stop the issuing of new licenses for oil and gas exploration. They also want to adjust the windfall tax to reduce the investment deductions from that tax. In the US, Biden seems to be under pressure to make it, let's say, harder, to put it simply, harder for new LNG projects to go forward. And I think in general, I think it's clear that there's going to be a big divide between Biden's policy on regulation of oil and gas industry versus potentially Trump's policy if he proves to be the winner. Any thoughts on those two elections, guys?
I have no idea about the UK, so let me do the US because this is where I have been feeling more comfortable.
Sure, go ahead.
On the decision on the US LNG plan, so which has actually been taken. So, right now there is, we have pressed the pause button on any additional, LNG plant, or at least, the Department of Energy giving, additional permitting in terms of non-FTA countries, which is what LNG exporters are interested in. It's important to remember that we have a little bit more than 100 billion cubic meters of LNG capacity in the US, which is currently under construction and which is going to arrive anywhere between the end of this year and 2028. So it's not like nothing is happening. And we have a massive amount of additional LNG capacity, which is under construction in the world. And everybody seems to be thinking from the supply side, but I think we should also be thinking on the demand side where this LNG is going. But to go back to the US, I mean, I think, between Biden and Trump, as we have observed between, the period of the Trump presidency and the period of the Biden presidency, I mean, they are totally and widely apart on most energy themes. I think maybe with a couple of exceptions, which are a little bit more bipartisan, I would tend to think that Trump would probably support, or at least the Republicans would probably support nuclear, and probably definitely CCUS as well. For the wind and solar, they are not particularly loved, but that doesn't mean that a certain number of red states, which have, relatively substantial wind and solar potential, like Texas, for example, to quote one, could not move forward with developing those resources because, hey, they are worth developing. So definitely, I mean, if Trump comes back, I would expect a little bit more drill, baby drill, to be back to on top of the agenda. My fear is that that would also be tied with don't care about methane emissions at all, and that would be, I mean, I focus quite a lot on methane emissions these days. That would be an absolute disaster.
Thierry?
Well, on the UK side, it seems to me that the Labour agreed that the latest development Rosebank that went on will be pursued. So again, I think there is a bit of a difference between what everybody scream in front of an election and how things turn up. And this is why where people are pissed off because you seems to policymakers seems to want to please the 5 extreme % of their own party, and when they come into power, they have to take into account the reality. And so I really think that it doesn't help for the democratic process at all. First of all, what are they going to do? I mean, if the UK stop its own development, if on the US you stop extra LNG, well, you'll need LNG from Qatar. It's quite obvious to balance the gas demand in the UK. In the US again, I really think we have. The US is governed also by extreme on both sides. Again, let's go back to Obama. Obama seems to be a decent guy, decent president that thought, well, there is too much gas in my country. Some countries may need it. It may also help the coal to gas switch. And it, by the way, what Obama did by approving those LNG liquefaction terminal was help Europe to be able to fight directly or indirectly the proxy war vis-à-vis Russia. So doing the stop and go thing just for pleasure of the again a few percentage of your electorate is tiring for all the rest of the people. I think at the end of the day, what the US people want is cheap gas. They have it. What they don't want is gas in the US that goes up through the roof. It's unlikely it will get, even if you produce more liquefaction plant. And at the end of the day, on an industrial level, I mean, if you make sure that the US is the major exporter, you also make sure that the US gets a positive spread in terms of gas prices versus the one where this gas is exported, be it Asia and Europe, and so therefore US has an economical advantage. And I think it's very simple, but as Anne-Sophie stated, if you go with extreme statement, at the end of the day, what the industry will not do is do the boring and absolutely needed stuff of making sure there are no methane emission and making sure there is no flaring. And people will just say, well, we'll see how things turn up, and when it turns up this way, it will be drill, baby drill, and when it turns out the other way, we will do something different. But we don't solve the problem of the piping and the methane emission problem.
Okay. Going to be an interesting year. Okay, I want to thank you both for attending as always, and to everyone listening or viewing. This has been NGW's In a Nutshell podcast, which takes stock of the most important developments shaping the global gas industry. And see you next time. Thank you.